I'm Stephen W. Long, and this is The Writing Life. My guest today is Phoebe Newman, and I'm just so pleased that we finally get a chance to chat a little bit. I was thinking as we were preparing for the show, so often a guest has a new book or something that they want to talk about, which is great. I love that. But Phoebe and I got together before the show, and you have some specific things that you want to talk about, and I think that's terrific. So first, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so glad that you're here.
Me too.
Yeah, and just a little bit by way of introduction, Phoebe is a longtime poet, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but you had a long-running radio show dedicated to poetry and so on.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that, but I wanted to talk about, I think that the topic that's really important to you, and that is getting it back. That's kind of how you, so kind of set that up. What are you getting back? Why do you need to get it back?
Well, I identified myself as a poet for a long time. I went to University of Florida and graduated with a BS in journalism. Then, after a while, I went to Vermont College and got the Master of Fine Arts in Writing. Now, when I was going to Vermont, I had to call Florida to get my transcript. And so I did. I said, you know, when I graduated, and the lady said, honey, that's so long ago, we're going to have to go down in the basement and dig through the files, because they didn't have it on the computer.
Digitally, yeah.
It was a long time. Anyway, so I started writing seriously poetry when I moved out to New Mexico, which was 1970, let's see, 80 something.
And Phoebe, just where in New Mexico?
Oh, Phil was living in Los Alamos.
We'll talk about that.
A strange, wonderful place. And I was living in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And working in the Empire State Building. So I have a lot of history of moving around. And I've lived in a lot of places, and I try to pick the things out from the places that couldn't be anywhere else. You know, there's not so many.
What makes it unique?
Yeah. There's not so many cottonmouths in New York City as there are in Georgia, for example. So I was writing and writing and writing. We moved to Alaska, and I wrote there a lot. And when I say I wrote a lot, I mean, what I did was I would write and then I would send them out. Every day seems like I would send something out and get something back in the mail. In Los Alamos, our mailman, we still had mailmen, and everything was done by typewriter and U.S. mail. You know, there was no electronic stuff. And I developed such a relationship with my mailman because he knew that I was looking for things to come back and say, yes, we're going to print this. And so it was wonderful. And also, when I was in grad school, we didn't have computers. So that was a lot of mailing back and forth and wonderful. When we moved down here, I kept writing and was in writers' groups, as you remember. And then about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I got a tremendous staph infection that knocked me out. And one of the things I lost was a lot of memory. And I'm old, so I know I'm going to lose my memory that way, but I feel like there's big chunks missing. And it's a grievous thing to not remember something as important to me as who I studied with, blank. I have to look things up that I wouldn't expect to have to look up, really important stuff. So I was thinking that maybe there were other people out there who've been through something traumatic like this illness and had to work their way back to remembering and doing and understanding and sharing whatever they were doing before they got sick. It's really hard to find it, and I miss it, and I'd like to write again. So anybody got any hints, I'll take them.
Okay, and but Phoebe, so the not remembering is one thing. I certainly do that, and I think you know, we all go through periods, and I'm sure it gets worse as we get older. But is that the preventative? Is that why you feel that you can't write or have lost that? They seem to me to be two different things.
Well, I think I have both.
Okay.
I've lost my confidence in my writing.
Okay.
I don't seem to have as much sensory input as I used to.
Okay.
Things don't strike me as miraculous.
Now we're getting
and-
somewhere. Yeah. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I notice, but not in the same way that I used to.
Would you call that inspiration?
Could, yeah, you could.
What sparks you? What?
Yeah, which sends
Kinda
me,
gives
what
you a
sends
kick
me to
and-
the typewriter.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, computer. I forgot. And I hope I'm welcoming enough, but it's really a sorrow not to
Oh,
have
sure.
that pouring in and being able to send it out, you know.
Well, it sounds like you were so prolific, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's the change.
Yeah. So, like I say, if anybody's got any hints, let me know.
Yeah. Well, and every show I solicit advice or suggestions or anything.
Comments,
So
yeah.
folks,
Good.
StephenWLong.com. Send me an email.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll
Okay.
get it to Phoebe. But so back up a little bit, because we had talked previously, and you were at least poetically involved in the Vietnam War, or the resistance to the war, or your thoughts about the war. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was living in Atlanta when the war began, and I was working for one of the most famous underground papers, which was called The Great Speckled Bird.
Okay.
So I was surrounded by people who were anti-war, and we were with, the Southern Poverty Law Center, with, see, here I go, blank, but with people that were working for civil rights and to end the war.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much activity in Atlanta. Everybody was there, and everybody cooperated. So I was very involved in all of that, and at the time I was living in Atlanta. I wasn't too much in touch with Phil. We had met in college, and that's 1970 something. No, 1967 in Ohio. We were both in college in Ohio, and but I wasn't in touch with him at that time. Later, I found out that he had been in Vietnam as a surgeon, ran a surgical hospital in Quang
boy.
Tri. And so I became more active in anti-war stuff. And when we were living in Ketchikan, there was a city park, a beautiful little spot with trees and grass and a beautiful stream running through. And while we were living there, the replica of the Vietnam Wall came to town.
Yeah.
There is one. It's 7/8 the size of the real one. It's absolutely accurate with all the names
Right.
and all the panels. And it comes
And that's
on a
got to
barge.
be monstrously huge.
Oh yeah, it's
yeah,
huge.
at 7/8.
And goes like this, came up on a barge from Seattle at a time when there were some fishing wars going on, so we were afraid it wouldn't get through. They were fighting over the boundaries for salmon and stuff.
Okay.
But it got there, and I saw a friend, and she said, "Oh, the dedication is Thursday night." And I said, "Of what?" And she said, "The monument." And I said, "What monument?"
Right.
And it was a poem that I had written to thank the people who brought the wall to Ketchikan.
Oh.
And I didn't know anything about this, and they had
Really?
had it turned into a beautiful monument, with bronze. And so there was a dedication, and I thanked the people who had done that and read the poem, and so it's in here, and I'll read it.
Oh, would you? Yeah, that
yeah,
would
yeah,
be
yeah.
great.
Is it this one? Yeah, I think so.
That would be great.
Okay. Girls' Night Out in Quang Tri. Naturally, their paper lanterns strung high in the narrow moments between the rains. Early August, and the table on the terrace spread with newspapers, and beer splashing into the near-clean glasses. We agree there's nothing to complain about. After all, it's not what any of us call home, this splatter of village, this cafe teetering on the edge of the coast road, the volcanic fumes and noise of the supply convoys a little hushed now, a half-kilometer away. And we'll be going stateside soon, we say, back to real life. But now this is the place for iced bottles, for baguettes, and clams clicking in spicy stews. We want to lay back, get slightly loaded, and never mind that one of us is pressing creases in her fatigues over and over with 2 fingers, and another is having trouble with words, the way they are going into her head, more like colors than ideas, she says. And another is examining her hands, turning them palm to back to palm. We probe and pick, tossing the empty shells to the cats around our ankles. There are moments when we all stop eating, stare into the darkness, listening for the chopper. The one that'll be coming in soon, full of boys who need us again and again, who will need us all night long, our hands soft on their faces, who will need us tomorrow as if the evacuation, the surgery never happened to them or is happening again. On the table, flowers in jars, layers of tissue blossom, and the waitress kicks violently at the huge toms sliding onto the terrace, the sweet slop of juice from our dishes dripping down her apron. She's learning English, wants to go to Chicago, to Miami, wherever there will be no paper lanterns to hang, to take down, to hang again in this damn rain, this war. She wants to be a nurse, like every you, she says. We leave too much tip, twice her wage, and drive back to the base. I'm nauseous, my hands slick, sweat evaporating in the night air. Then the glare of spotlights, the flapping rotors, the whip of stiff canvas unfolded, folded, a corpsman hosing down the pad, the sea air blowing into my face, the fragrance of blood and fatigue. Just beyond the perimeter, we can see the lanterns, and above them, the waxing moon, perfect white globes suffused with light. All of us stand quiet, hopeful for a moment in this pure loveliness. Then they're gone, the small candles extinguished, the moon behind a cloud, the monsoon sliding in.
Oh. Well, you know, that's heartbreaking. I mean, it's, the poem is lovely, but the subject could make you so angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Or it does me anyway.
Mm-hmm. Good. It's successful.
Yeah. So, which brings me to be sort of cute about it, why poetry? I mean, poetry is so I answered my own question. I think poetry is so powerful. So the other question is, why is poetry so powerful? Why is that more powerful than if we read a prose piece?
My feeling when I was writing a lot of poetry was that it's a tiny bit harder to read than fiction, than prose.
Okay.
And you have to pay a little more
Pulls
attention.
you in, yeah.
You have to pay a little more attention and not be resistant to it. I think that poets have a bad rap. People think that they're different and special, and I suppose a lot of people act like we are. But the important thing to me about being a poet and writing poetry is it's a way to show compassion. It's a way to show the equality of people, that no one's better in any way than anybody else, no matter what we think or hear. We're all here on this earth in a soul and a body with a soul. And as soon as we can pay attention to that, which I think poetry does very well, most of it, then we're more free in some way to relate to the world in the way that we need
Strips
to.
away the resistance, maybe the barrier.
Yeah.
You'd said something at the beginning of that, and I'd never thought of this before, that poetry is harder. And so it demands our attention, like when somebody whispers, you have to lean in.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Of course, some of it is just fun.
I love it, and it reminds me, the similarity with music. And that is, sometimes what is a little bit of a surprise, in hindsight is inevitable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the word choice or the juxtaposition, I didn't expect that word there, or that word. But then you think about it and go, oh, well, this is perfect. That's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The experience. I don't know what I was going to say. But I think that's one thing that poetry does really well, is to admit that we all have similar fears and hopes and joys, and we also experience not knowing, having so many questions, and to be able to relay that in a way that people can read and understand and relate to is really good, I think, to have questions that you can't answer, and nobody else can either.
Well, sometimes the comfort is I guess, in the asking. I was interviewed one time for my book. A newspaper guy said, can people relate to something that they haven't experienced? And I said, well, I think we read for two reasons, at least two reasons. And one is to confirm the familiar. And, I'm not the only one that felt like that. Or to experience the unfamiliar, which is, I think, kind of what you're saying. So I've never actually been to Mars, but it's not unpleasant to read about that because
Right.
I've never done that. And so then you get to...
Maybe you have.
Yeah, a little bit.
Maybe that's only a memory.
Yeah. The other thing we talked about was, or you had mentioned, is the ordinary versus the rarefied. Talk a little bit about, and I don't know, is that the same as what I just said, or is that, did you have something else in mind?
I just found this list today. Let me read it to you.
Yeah.
'Cause it's a list of things that I love to write about and I love to read about. Dogs, rivers, baptisms, 57 Chevys, loving, and Little Richard.
That's a good list.
It's a great list. And I was looking through so much of my stuff, and there they are, all of them. Of course, I also write about Elvis and other stars from my era. Little Richard comes up a lot because he has such a wonderful name, Little Richard. And I have some about jazz people and country music people and Loretta Lynn and other folks like that. So I'm drifting off here. Tell me.
Well, again, what that leads me to ask is it the honesty? The people that you're talking about, it seems to me that's poetic, Loretta Lynn, and it's so honest. And maybe it's an emotion that we've skirted the edge of, or maybe we've been deep in that same emotion, but she can express it. Is it? You think that may be what draws you?
Well, take Little Richard, for example. I mean, like a lot of rock and roll stars, they came from a life of poverty and church.
Sure, you bet.
And church music, And then somehow they slipped over a little bit and learned a new key, a new technique, just from listening and watching. And with a good manager who was interested in money, rose to the top. And so I think that's something we all wish for each other and for ourselves, that we're going to hit that right chord someday.
Okay.
And we'll be famous and rich and beautiful and never get old.
Isn't that I'm trying to think, is that a song or a poem?
Probably.
No, the lost chord.
Oh,
Isn't that, that's
it's
famous
music.
and I can't remember
Yeah,
why. But
song, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, not song, but music.
Okay.
The Lost Chord. Um, so,
Well, the topics that you picked remind me of, just when you say the words, remind me of your work. And the reason is it's really accessible. And what I don't like about poets, and maybe it's because it embarrasses me, but when I try to read something and I don't get it,
yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
and I get yours.
Oh, good.
And because I get these. And it's things that they're tangible or that I can relate to, or they're solid. And maybe that's part of the appeal.
And you don't have to be brilliant, and you don't have to have a college education or further
Yeah.
to understand them. You know, there's something that's in your genes that
Mm-hmm.
that you got when you were young, and you still got it
Mm-hmm.
if it comes out. Yeah.
But I love the era that you're referencing.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You're not as old as I am, but it was great.
I think, and this probably, we're close enough in age. Probably every generation says this, but I'll say it for us. I think we were really lucky. And economically, certainly there were cultural problems that were
Oh yeah.
tucked away, that race relations and so on, that I didn't know about because they were tucked away and I wasn't there. But there were other things that were just idyllic. And I think for me, people like me, the ability to make a living, the safety that I felt. And I didn't even, I mean, it was part of my life, so it was so common that you don't think, oh, I'm safe. You know what I mean? Because you just are. And I remember as a young kid, 8, 9, 10, just roaming, getting on your bike, and I was gone all day.
Oh yeah.
Or my mom would send my brother and I with whatever it was, $1 or something, to walk a mile to catch the bus, to take the bus into town, to go to the show, and we were just gone all day, all Saturday.
Yeah.
And there was never a thought of being kidnapped or hurt or anything.
Oh.
And I don't know if statistically the reality has changed. I guess I hear that we're in a safe time, but that's not the perception. Perception is that everything is dangerous now. And so I'm a little nostalgic.
Yeah, I because I grew up in Atlanta with so much, racism, that I didn't know what racism was.
Sure.
And black people took care of me. My mother and daddy hired black people to take care of me when they would go out or
Sure.
to clean the house
Sure.
or something. But I always felt like they were the ones that really loved me and understood me. And so when the civil rights movement began, I was very empathetic and very anxious to pull more white people into it. I remember I was in Atlanta when Martin Luther King was killed, and
Oh,
I was
boy.
able to go to his funeral. Everybody could go.
Sure.
It was just a huge procession. And I was there holding hands and singing with some Hell's Angels.
Isn't that something?
And black people in front of us, black people holding hands with us. I mean, I felt together with people for the first time.
Yeah.
And then I was involved in music for a long time, and there was no racism there, really. I mean, except, Miles and those people, everybody knew they were great because they were black.
Sure.
But the way that's still going on now, and the frightening thing about being a child now is, of course, all the weapons that are available. And the teachers being afraid to go teach, and
Yeah.
the kids being afraid, the parents being afraid anyway, of the kids
Right.
to go to school, because
Yeah.
what's going to happen? But I mean, that's not racism, but it has that same kind of feeling about
Well,
it.
it's another component of the era.
Oh, yeah.
And I was talking about the era that you and
Yeah.
I grew up
Yeah.
in. And
Yeah.
I think, again, I have watched some documentaries about when you chart the prominence of unions And the wage disparity, as an example, was much closer in the right after the war, so 50s and 60s, and then there started to be a change in the 70s. Certainly by the 80s,
Right.
there was a growing disparity, and here we are now with the 1% and so on.
Well, we could talk about 57 Chevys for a while.
That'd be better. Okay, let's do that.
Oh, I can't.
Well, I'll tell you what I heard about the 57 Chevy was that Chevrolet was so popular and they were selling so many cars that they feared somebody would accuse them of having a monopoly. That is General Motors, not just Chevy. And the 57 Chevy was designed to be unpopular so that they could show that, no, we're just like everybody else. And it backfired because it was so popular. So that's what I think I know about the 57
Four on the floor.
the Bel Air. Well, let's talk about your radio show. I know you did that. And tell people the name, because it's a fun name.
Oh, the name is One Poem a Day Won't Kill You.
Yeah.
And I have to confess that I did my first radio show when I was 4. That was
What took you so long?
I know, 1944.
All right.
And in those days, you'd go into the studio, and all the ladies would have on dresses and high heels and hats.
Oh, boy.
Oh, I mean, you dressed up to go in the radio as if you were, nobody knew about TV, but as if, you know, you were going on TV.
Sure.
And it was a weekly story, you know, so I did that. But I was in college. I think I was at University of Florida when I started having a weekly jazz program, Saturday night or something. I loved it. I loved working in radio. I also worked at a top 40 station in Atlanta.
Okay. Yeah.
I was the only white person on the staff, and when they found out about it, it all broke loose. My boss had hired me and was paying me with money from the Urban League. I was supposed to be a black trainee, and somebody showed up one day and saw I wasn't a black trainee, and it all fell apart. But I loved radio, and when we moved to Ketchikan, they have a remarkable radio station, KRBD, FM, and they belong to the Alaska Public Network, Public Radio Network. And I hadn't been there very long, but somehow I got this urge to go down and see if they would let me do a radio show. And just a side story, the radio station was built over Ketchikan Creek, and odors of fish rose. So the whole place smelled like fish. Well, I didn't know that, and I got all dressed up and went in, and I thought, oh no, God, what is this? You know, is it my raincoat? Is it my shoes? What is it? And I heard this voice from way over saying, "It's not you." So I went in. I didn't have on a hat, but I went in and talked to the manager and said, could we do this? And what we did was invited everybody, anybody who wanted to read a poem during the month of April, which was then beginning as National Poetry Month. And we had a slight time limit, but it was very flexible. And then we would play them one day of the month. So we didn't know what to expect, but I tell you, honey, I had like 60 or 70 people the first month.
Really?
So we had to say no to some people. We did this for 10 years. And then when I left Alaska, somebody else took over, and so they're still doing it 12 years later.
Oh, boy.
It got picked up by NPR. I interviewed with Corky Roberts, somebody.
Really? Corky, yeah,
Roberts.
sure.
Yeah. And I had a friend at BBC London, and they picked it up. And stations all over the country would call in and say, how do you do that? So it was an idea that had been waiting to be done and got done.
And you did it.
And I did it. I was so happy. I couldn't do the technical part very well, but I did the organizing and the editing and stuff. So that was my gift to radio in the southern southeast Alaska.
Well, I think you gave all of us a gift, too. You are a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're out of time, so Maybe
Goodbye.
we can maybe we can do it again sometime.
One appointment day won't kill you.
I
Okay.
hope so. Hope not. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And just stay tuned. Come back and see us next time. I'm Stephen W. Long. And again, if you would like to contact me, it's stephenwlong.com. Interested in subjects or guests or whatever you have to say. And we'll just see you next time. Thanks. And
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one
Yeah,
just
I
with
think
yourself
as
without
long
me
as
doing
they
the
think we're
Broncos?
done. If
No,
they got
no.
enough, they got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch. I'm
Oh.
hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just bite too.